lion with the head of a man, carved from a single piece of rock in the Egyptian desert. No monument on Earth is more recognizable or more puzzling.
Well, the enduring mystery of this is that we know so little about it.
There are no records. The Sphinx is so massive and so mysterious.
There's something we must be missing with this.
Now, a team of investigators will try to put a name to this face and provide an answer to the oldest mystery of them all, the riddle of the Sphinx. The relics of the past hold secrets written in gold, stone, and blood. We can unlock them. These are the secrets of history's greatest treasures. Egypt is home to some of the world's great ancient treasures. And in the desert sands of Giza, near Cairo, sits one of the greatest of them all, the Sphinx. A mythical creature with the body of a lion and the head of a man. At nearly 60 feet high and 240 feet long, the Sphinx is the biggest single stone statue in existence. As tall as a 6-story building, as long as a 747 jet. It has watched over the world for millennia and stands guard over the Great Pyramid, last survivor of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The Great Sphinx is one of the world's most iconic monuments. And Dr. Melinda Hartwig is an archaeologist who seeks to unlock its
This is amazing. You know, you can see how this has just captured the hearts and minds of travelers and visitors and kings for thousands and thousands of years. I mean, who wouldn't be captivated by it?
The Sphinx has drawn explorers for centuries and is one of the most studied treasures of all antiquity. But it remains a frustrating puzzle.
We really don't know much about it. There are no texts that date from the time that it was built. You would have expected the Egyptians to say something about it. We look at the Sphinx and what is it? What is it for? Who did it? These are sort of the enduring questions that we continue to ask as archaeologists.
Now a team of experts is setting out to solve the mystery of the Sphinx once and for all. When was it built? Why? And whose face does it bear? Can they put a name to him?
Every statue represented someone. It could be a king, it could be a private person, it could be a god.
Was the Sphinx an act of devotion by a loyal son?
He is showing to the world that he is a legitimate heir, and therefore he has every right to rule.
Was it one part of a much bigger secret plan?
So the main purpose of all this construction, all this building, was to ensure the eternal life, the immortal existence of the pharaoh.
Or did it start out as something else entirely?
Taking all this evidence together, it's quite clear to me that when this was first built, it was built as a lion.
Competing theories, only one solution. Gaber Omar is an Egyptian archaeologist who has spent years searching for the origins of the Great Sphinx of Giza. But even today, this giant monster continues to throw up tantalizing new clues. And a recent discovery has begun to shed new light on this enduring mystery. It's the half-buried remains of an ancient wall.
As we were excavating here in this place, we discovered part of the wall. We thought in the very beginning it was just a small wall. When we kept digging, we found such a huge wall extending from the north to the south. The mud bricks were in a very good condition. That's why we thought, must be a modern wall.
On closer examination, Omar was astonished to discover the wall enclosed the entire Sphinx and the ruined temples that sit immediately in front of it. We may think of the Sphinx as a guardian of the pyramids, but this new evidence suggests the guardian was itself under protection. But who was guarding it, and why? Concealed in the wall, an important lead is discovered. Beneath centuries of sand and dirt, archaeologists uncovered a clue: a royal seal, known as a cartouche, bearing the name of the pharaoh Thutmose IV. Thutmose ruled Egypt in the 18th dynasty, around 1400 BC. And he was famous for his ambitious building projects. So could the presence of Thutmose's cartouche on the Sphinx wall mean that he was the creator of this mighty monolith? Melinda Hartwig finds a clue standing in front of the Sphinx between its paws. It's a giant stone tablet, or stela.
Oh, this is an amazing stela that is the first mention of the Sphinx. At the top of the stela, we have two images of Thutmose IV. And in one side, he's actually incensing the Sphinx. Then the other one, he's giving water offerings. The Sphinx is crouched on this plinth right in front of him.
Carved on the tablet is a legend recorded by Thutmose recounting an incident from his youth when he was a young prince. On a hunting expedition, the young Thutmose came across the Sphinx, buried up to its neck in desert sand. Exhausted by the midday sun, Thutmose lay down in the shade of the giant statue. According to the story carved into the tablet, as he slept, the Sphinx spoke to the young prince in a dream.
So we know at this point now that the sand was covering the Sphinx. And in this dream, the Sphinx came to him and he said, "If you would clear away the sands from my body, I will make you king." And that's exactly what he did. And Thutmose IV became king, and he commemorated that very event in this stela that we call the Dream Stela.
Thutmose had not expected to become king. But when his older brother died soon after, he took the throne and announced that the Sphinx had kept its word. So Thutmose didn't build the Sphinx. By the time he came to power, it was already a ruin. He dug it from the sand and built the wall so it wouldn't get buried again. It's possible that without Thutmose, the Sphinx might have been forgotten, but generations that came after followed his lead, seeking the Sphinx's blessing and turning it into a full-blown tourist attraction.
With Thutmose IV, the cult of the Sphinx just explodes.
From the time of Thutmose onwards, the Sphinx became a place of pilgrimage. The Egyptians believed that worshiping the mighty statue could bring health and good fortune.
People would come from Memphis, the capital city. They would come from all over Egypt, and they would come to the Sphinx and leave gifts.
The Egyptians of Thutmose's day called the Sphinx Horem Akhet, god of the sky.
This was a popular sort of pilgrimage route. And tourists come and they actually leave statements saying, "I came, I visited, and it was wonderful."
The Sphinx became so popular that even Thutmose's great-grandson, King Tutankhamun, built a palace here. So we know that 3,500 years ago, the Sphinx played a huge role in the Egyptian world. But the question remains, who built it in the first place and why? The Great Sphinx is the biggest statue of its kind in the world. But try to decode its secrets, and there's very little to go on. No maker's mark, no record of when it was built or who did it. So the experts must read the clues in the landscape. At first glance, it seems obvious to link the Sphinx to the man-made mountains that tower over it. the pyramids. The pyramids we can date. They were built over 1,000 years before Thutmose's time, around 2500 BC. The pyramid of the pharaoh Khafre lies directly behind the Sphinx, and for this reason, many argue it must be his work. But proving the connection between the two has always been a problem. There's no test to determine when the Sphinx was made, because it's carved directly from the bedrock. So now, experts from outside the world of Egyptology are challenging the view that Khafre built the Sphinx. Geologist Colin Reeder is one of them. He believes the Sphinx is older than the pyramids. Looking at the walls of the Sphinx enclosure, the clues are written in stone.
The first thing that struck me when I got here was there's some very particular patterns of erosion, and only on the walls. We've got these rounded features. I mean, you can see a great example here. This piece of limestone that's got this heavy rounded appearance, it's defined by these joints. And all along you get this sequence of heavily eroded joints with the rock between them, taking on this very bulbous, rounded appearance. Smooth at the top, rough at the bottom. For me, it was only one thing that had caused this, and that was flowing water.
Thousands of years ago, the environment in this part of Egypt was much wetter than it is today. Heavy rains accompanied by flash floods were more common, and the water had to go somewhere.
When you look at the landscape that the Sphinx sits in, we're looking up a hill. The ground levels from this point rise, they rise beyond the pyramids. And over a rocky plateau like this, when it rains heavily, you get surplus water running off, cascading down the plateau and into the Sphinx enclosure.
On their own, these findings prove nothing. But their significance becomes clear when Reeder puts them together with another piece of evidence in the terrain uphill from the Sphinx. To build their pyramids, the ancient Egyptians dug out millions of stone blocks from a huge quarry. And to Reeder, the location of the quarry is a major clue.
At the time of the pyramids, just the other side of this mound was a huge base quarry that was excavated for the stone to build the pyramids. And water coming off the high ground further in that direction will have discharged into the quarry, and it won't have been able to reach the Sphinx.
Reeder's theory says that if the pyramids, and therefore the quarry, came first, then any flood water would have drained away before it hit the enclosure walls. This damage wouldn't be here. For Reeder, that leads to one startling conclusion.
Because if the Sphinx was there after quarrying began, water runoff will never have been able to reach the Sphinx. We won't have got these features of water erosion on the walls of the enclosure. These features have to have formed before the quarries were worked. And what this means to me in terms of the age of the Sphinx is that the Sphinx has to have been present at Giza before the pyramids were built.
Could the Sphinx really have been here before the pyramids? Perhaps it was this statue that drew the pharaohs to build their pyramids here in a later time. That would make the Sphinx more than 4,700 years old. Reeder's theory is controversial, but he doesn't stop there. He's going back to basic principles, and he's come up with a striking line of inquiry.
When you stand and look at the Sphinx from this direction, the proportion's wrong. And yet the head of the Sphinx, when you look at it from this direction particularly, it's too small. The body is long, it's tall, and the head is quite out of proportion. For the ancient Egyptians who got the proportions so wrong, doesn't seem to make sense. They were masters at work in stone. There's something we must be missing with this. There has to be another piece of the jigsaw.
And the answer lies in the stone itself.
We know for most of its life that the Sphinx has been buried up to the shoulders, the neck in sand. I've seen at other places at Giza that the sand tends to protect the rocks that are buried beneath it. The head's been exposed for almost the entire life of the Sphinx. It's been exposed to wind-blown sand, the effect of the sun. If anything, the head should be more degraded than the body, but we see the reverse. And for me, there's only one real explanation for that, and that's that the head has been recut. At a later stage, whatever was there originally was retrimmed, reprofiled to give us this pharaoh's head. The inescapable conclusion from that is that originally this wasn't a Sphinx at all. It started life as something different.
For Reeder, the Sphinx is not only much older than the pyramids, it also started out looking very different. Thousands of years ago, the climate here was much wetter, and there were greater numbers of wild animals. The top predator here, and the animal that the Egyptians most revered, was the lion.
Lions were very important symbols because they are the loudest and the greatest creatures. So, of course, they're kingly. They have pride, so that the lion, like the king, looks after people. They are powerful, scary, and have big teeth and claws. The king's throne had lion heads on either side. The king's bed had lions on it. Even Ramses II had pet lions who went in with him into battle.
Colin Reeder has discovered a sacred carving of a lion on a stone tablet, created many decades before the pyramids. Like many early Egyptian lion statues, it's a female, and Reeder thinks it's an important clue.
Trying to find out the origins of the Sphinx, I looked for early examples of lions, and I came across this. This is an image from a time before the times of the pyramids at Giza. And we know it's important, and we know it's connected somehow with Pharaoh, because as well as the lion, we've got a carving of a pharaoh's name on the same stone. The significance of the lion for me was that when you consider that profile in comparison with the profile of the Sphinx, suddenly it all seemed to make some sense. And you overlay it on the profile of the Sphinx, everything seems to drop into place. It's quite clear to me that when this was first built, it was built as a lion.
Reeder's theory sounds far-fetched, but is it? This statue in Cairo's museum is the oldest Egyptian Sphinx ever found. It shows clear signs of damage around the neck and head, suggesting that a lion's ears were hacked away and the stone reshaped to make a human head. Perhaps this is what happened on a much larger scale with the Great Sphinx at Giza. But other experts like Egyptologist Peter Lacavara disagree.
If there had been an earlier date to the Sphinx, if it had been made in an earlier period, we would expect to see monuments of earlier kings associated with it, evidence of where the builders lived, evidence of their tools. None of that exists, so it seems impossible to be an earlier structure.
Whatever the truth, one thing is beyond dispute. Somebody at some stage ordered this vast piece of rock to be carved into the shape of a human head. What kind of person would seek to be immortalized in this way? And can we put a name to it? Whoever carved the Sphinx's face had wealth and power and a monumental ego, just like the men who built these pyramids. The pyramid directly behind the Sphinx was built by the pharaoh Khafre. He also built the two temples nearby. So experts think that Khafre is the most likely candidate.
So the Sphinx links up to all of these monuments of Khafre, the temple, the pyramid. So the Sphinx sort of stands here as a guardian to all these monuments of Khafre.
But that alone isn't proof. This area is packed with temples, tombs, and monuments. Some experts point the finger in another direction, to the builder of another great pyramid which lies close to the Sphinx. It was built by the father of Khafre. His name was Khufu. Khufu was the first pharaoh to build a pyramid at Giza. And if any man was capable of thinking big, it was this guy.
Khufu was an amazing innovator. You can't underestimate what he did, because essentially he comes to a vast, desolate place, which is the Giza Plateau. and he builds Egypt's largest pyramid.
At 483 feet high and built from 2.3 million blocks of stone weighing over 2 tons each, Khufu's man-made mountain took 30 years to build and was the tallest structure in the world. It provided Khufu with the most magnificent tomb of all time. It also sent a powerful message.
Nothing like this had ever appeared on the landscape before. This pyramid was built as a type of propagandistic statement, you know? This is the power of the pharaoh.
So maybe Khufu could have built the Sphinx. Having changed the face of Egypt, why not go for broke? His face, there for all to see, for all time. History paints Khufu as a feared dictator, an obsessive who almost broke his people in the building of his pyramid. This way, the theory goes, he would always be watching over them.
This is the type of pharaoh that would have wanted to put his mark on the landscape, not only in terms of his pyramid, but also in terms of the Sphinx. Not unlike what we see today with, say, large statues of dictators who really want to sort of command the hearts of the people, the minds of the people, as well as the landscape.
Dr. Melinda Hartwig is in the Khufu camp of belief that it was he who built the Sphinx and not his son, Khafre. And she is searching for evidence in the layout of the site to support her theory.
Today, this is the approach that most tourists would take. Here's the Sphinx in front of us with the Pyramid of Khafre behind. However, they'd be coming from Cairo. This wasn't how people saw it in the ancient world. They would have seen it slightly differently because they would have been coming from the south.
Today, visitors come from Cairo to the northeast, but the ancient capital of Memphis lay in the opposite direction, meaning the people of Khufu's time saw things differently.
Visitors would have been coming from Memphis. They would have been coming from the south. And so this would have been the first thing that they saw. They would see the Sphinx in profile, and they would see the Pyramid of Khufu, not Khafre. By seeing the Sphinx in profile and the Pyramid of Khufu behind, you have a sense of a two-dimensional rendering, which was very important to the ancient Egyptians.
The Egyptians loved a profile, and not only in their carvings and paintings. Even some of their sculptures were designed to be viewed from sideways on. And when you look at this as an ancient Egyptian, it appears as if the Sphinx is guarding Khufu's tomb. And that's not all. Dr. Hartwig turns her attention to the monuments of Khafre, Khufu's son, and the man assumed to have built the Sphinx. Khafre's pyramid lies directly behind the Sphinx. But Hartwig finds a clue in the layout of the causeway that leads from Khafre's pyramid down to his temple.
So here's Khafre's causeway. Now this is where the body of the king would have been brought up and then buried inside of the pyramid. But when you analyze the position, there's something that's just not quite right. You would expect the causeway to come right down here, like right in front of me, and then head due east. But instead, it swerves.
Traditionally, the ceremonial path leading to a pharaoh's pyramid runs due east in a straight line. Not this one. Khafre's causeway is set at an angle, and it appears to go around the Sphinx.
It swerves, it's over here, and it swerves to avoid something. And that thing is the Sphinx, which means that the Sphinx existed there already before Khafre.
If the Sphinx was already here, then that points to it being Khufu's creation. To confirm the theory, Hartwig leaves the Giza Plateau. She's come to the only place in the world where there's a confirmed likeness of Khufu, the Cairo Museum. What happens when we compare that image to the face of the Sphinx?
When we look at the face of Khufu, he has very broad planes to his face. His ears are pushed forward. He has deep-set eyes. These are the same features that we see on the Sphinx, so it makes perfect sense that the Sphinx is Khufu.
There seems to be a resemblance between the two. And there's another clue here. In every known statue of Khafre, he's shown wearing a ceremonial beard. But the Sphinx doesn't have a beard, and neither does the statue of Khufu. There's only one problem. This statue is less than 4 inches tall.
In getting a positive ID, of course, you need more than just this small little statue. Such a tiny thing to compare against something as massive as the Sphinx. In the end, there is so little evidence that we can be absolutely sure of whose face is on the Sphinx.
It seems likely the Sphinx was built by one of the pharaohs that built these pyramids. There's Khufu, builder of the Great Pyramid with unparalleled power and ambition. And there's his son, Khafre, whose pyramid stands close by. But there's also another family member in the frame. Khufu had an older son who came to the throne before Khafre. His name was Djedefre. For many years, experts ruled out Djedefre as the creator of the Sphinx because he was thought to have been an outcast from the family. Rumor had it Djedefre murdered his older brother, Kawab, to seize the throne, and the murder caused a rift in the family. As an outcast, he surely could not have been responsible for building the Great Sphinx. But back on the Giza Plateau, an extraordinary discovery has turned the rumor on its head. This is the solar boat of Khufu, one of the oldest and best preserved ships from antiquity. And Egyptologist Salima Ikram has a theory. This boat puts Khufu's son Djedefre right back in the frame as the possible builder of the Great Sphinx.
Khufu's boat is one of the most astonishing artifacts ever found in Egypt. To imagine that this had been used by Khufu actually during his lifetime, you see it now in all of its splendor, but in fact it was found in thousands of little pieces in a pit next to his pyramid. And Khufu actually used it during his lifetime. He probably sat there and had lots of people row him about. And then, upon his death, they took it apart and brought all the pieces up high to the Giza Plateau and buried it here with him.
To the ancient Egyptians, funerary offerings like this were of crucial importance. They believed that when the pharaoh died, he needed a boat to transport him to the afterlife and ensure Egypt's continued existence.
The Egyptians believed that during the course of the day, the sun traveled across the sky with the king in it. At night, it would go through sort of a dark space which would illuminate, fighting off all kinds of demons and beasties that wanted to eat it up. And therefore, the day could rise again, and so you have this continuous cycle. So this boat was absolutely crucial because with it, he was making sure that the sun rose and set and that the cosmos continued and that Egypt survived.
So was this magnificent boat offering the work of Khufu himself? Salima Ikram ventures into the pit where the boat was found in search of clues as to who placed it there. And she's not disappointed.
We had always assumed that Khufu had this boat pit built for himself. What's terribly exciting here in this Khufu's boat pit is that you have the name of his son, Djedefre, in a cartouche there and another one there. So this means that Khufu didn't build this. This was actually constructed by King Djedefre for his father Khufu. And so this really changes how we think of Djedefre's legitimacy.
Here is the proof that Djedefre was close to his father Khufu and played a leading role in his father's funeral at Giza. Far from being a black sheep, Djedefre is starting to look like a doting son. By honoring Khufu in this lavish show of extravagance, Djedefre not only showed his loyalty, but also strengthened his grip on power. And if Djedefre was willing to go to any lengths to honor his father, could he also have built the Sphinx in his father's image,
Jedefre is a very good contender. He did other work on the Giza Plateau, like constructing the solar boat pit for his father Khufu. And in fact, by doing something like this, or by constructing the Great Sphinx, we can see that he is trying to be legitimized.
We now have 4 competing theories. Was the Sphinx carved before the pyramids in the form of a lion? Was it the work of the pharaoh Khafre, his father Khufu, or Khufu's older son Jedefre? To get to the truth, the experts need to go deeper into the ancient rock of the Giza Plateau and the epic monuments of the ancient Egyptians. The investigation into who built the Great Sphinx has produced 4 lines of inquiry. Did it start out as a lion? Was it the work of the powerful dictator Pharaoh Khufu? Did Khufu's son Jedefre have the Sphinx carved to strengthen his claim to the throne? Or was it the work of Khufu's younger son Khafre, whose pyramid lies directly behind the Sphinx? Dr. Peter Lacavara has decided to explore Khafre's causeway. It's a raised path that still exists today, passing right beside the Sphinx enclosure and running uphill to Khafre's pyramid.
We're looking up at the causeway that runs from the pyramid all the way down to the temple.
At the corner of the Sphinx enclosure, Lacavara has found an important piece of evidence left behind by Khafre's builders.
What's really interesting is, if you can see up here in the corner, there's a cut that's been filled in by modern blocks, and we think there was a drainage ditch that siphoned water off from the causeway down into this big depression where the quarry was, and would have flooded this area when it did rain.
The purpose of Khafre's drainage channel was to prevent his causeway from flooding by draining off rainwater into the area where the Sphinx sits today. Lacavara believes this is evidence the Sphinx didn't exist before Khafre.
Clearly, it doesn't make sense that if this had already existed, if the Sphinx had been built, say, by Khufu, they wouldn't be flooding this area with water. There would be no reason to be pouring water into this great monument. So it seems clear that that is evidence that this Sphinx was made by Khafre and late in his reign.
If Lacavara is right, then when Khafre came to the throne, this area was nothing more than a pit used for collecting excess rainwater. The Sphinx hadn't yet been carved from the stone. But Lacavara is frustrated by the lack of hard evidence.
We know very little as far as a written record goes. It's such a remote period, there are no records. Nothing survives. There's no inscriptions, nothing specifically to point to when it was made and who made it.
Unlike the pyramids, the Sphinx wasn't built out of blocks hauled to the location. It was carved right out of the bedrock in a single piece. So Lacavara is going right back to the beginning. If the Sphinx started out as a lump of rock in a quarry, he wants to explore step by step just how it was created. And at another site close to the Sphinx, he finds a clue frozen into the stone.
The area around the Sphinx would have originally looked something like this. It's great because you can kind of see it's a moment frozen in time. So you can see how they actually worked here. You can imagine hundreds and hundreds of workmen just lined up here, pounding away at this stone, just in lines, one after the other. Really a machine, smashing these blocks, smashing these channels out of the rock, creating these channels in order to free them from the bedrock and then move them off to go build the pyramids and the temples here at Giza.
So whoever it was that built the Sphinx started by removing thousands of tons of rock from the desert floor in the form of huge multi-ton blocks. The lump of rock left behind was then carved into the shape of the Sphinx. But the most important evidence is hidden underneath the surface of the Sphinx. It's in the composition of the rock itself.
If you look, the limestone is layered like a layer cake, and some layers were softer than others, depending on what was in them. And so they've eroded more than the layers above and below them. And this kind of very distinctive patterning that we see here, we also can see in the walls of the quarry over there.
Lacavara has identified a telltale pattern in the limestone. Millions of years ago, the Giza Plateau was under the sea. On the sea floor, the compressed remains of billions of marine creatures, layer upon layer, gradually formed into the rock we see today. Depending on their precise composition, some layers are harder and more durable than others. And that leaves a unique pattern of weathering running through the rock of the Sphinx today. Lacavara decides to search for that same pattern. When he goes to the temple built by Khafre in front of the Sphinx, he sees exactly the same sequence of soft and hard rock. The grooves in the walls of the temple and the grooves on the Sphinx match.
It's incredible. You can see here where we have this differential pattern of wear. Here's this soft layer here that runs right across this block and the neighboring block. So because of the wear pattern and the fossils, they're all sort of like fingerprints. They all tell us exactly where they came from. And so we can match them all up with the rock on the Sphinx's body itself.
The unique pattern running through the stone proves that the rock that once surrounded the Sphinx's body was taken to make Khafre's temples. So the Sphinx itself must have been carved after Khafre's temples. There was no Sphinx before that time.
I think there's no doubt that Khafre built the Great Sphinx. I think all the evidence points in that direction. Any of the other evidence is just full of holes. It's the logical choice. It's the one that makes, the only one that makes real sense.
If Lacavara's theory is correct, there is no room for doubt. It was Khafre who built the Sphinx, not his father, Khufu, or his brother, Djedefre. Lacavara's findings also rule out Colin Reeder's theory that the Sphinx began as a lion, carved much earlier than Khafre's time. So the face on the Sphinx has a name. This is Khafre. One question remains. Can the team discover why he built this monster? The Great Sphinx of Giza is the largest single stone statue in the world. It was built by the pharaoh Khafre around 4,500 years ago. But what motivated him to create this vast structure? Until recently, almost nothing was known about Khafre. But now, Egyptologist Zahi Hawass has uncovered an extraordinary tomb buried in the desert sand close to the Sphinx.
This is the most recent discovery in Egypt. This seems to be a special cemetery of priests of Khafre. It's something that we never expected.
Around 2494 BC, the pharaoh Khafre died after ruling Egypt for a quarter of a century. But this discovery shows that he wasn't forgotten.
To be forgotten was the worst thing that could ever happen to you in ancient Egypt. So you establish a cult where people will come so that offerings are given, bread, beer, wine, and for a king, it's even more important.
This is the tomb of Khafre's priests. Their job was to keep his name alive after his death through religious rituals and offerings to the gods.
This is unique discovery. For the first time, this cemetery actually shows the people involved in the cult of Khafre and also the Sphinx. And we know that the cult of Khafre continued until the end of the Old Kingdom.
It's now believed that this cult of Khafre lasted far longer than previously suspected. For hundreds of years, priests tended Khafre's temple. But why did Khafre's memory survive for so many centuries after his death? The answer and the final clue to the mystery of the Sphinx lies with the giant statue itself and the temple that sits at its paws.
What's really interesting is the design of this temple. This is kind of a unique building because we haven't seen this in pyramid complexes before. This is an additional, an extra temple. So what was this doing here? And it must relate to the Sphinx. And you can see that the Sphinx kind of looms over it.
Archaeologists call this the Sphinx Temple. Built by the pharaoh Khafre, it's the only one of its kind in Egypt.
Around it are these remains of huge pillars, which would have had giant statues of Khafre standing in front of them. And then this one here, one over here, one over here, one over here, one there, one there. So we have 12 statues in total.
Altogether, Lacavara maps out the positions of 24 stone pillars and what he believes were 12 huge statues of Khafre. To Lacavara, this can only mean one thing. Khafre and his people were sun worshippers.
It's a time when the god of the sun is becoming much more important in Egyptian religion. The solar symbolism of this temple is pretty clear. It's reflected in the numbers of the statues symbolizing the hours of the day.
This is the key to understanding the purpose of the Sphinx. It was not just a lump of rock carved from the plateau. It's part of a vast cosmic building project. And when Lacavara maps out the positions of Khafre's temple, the Sphinx, and the pyramid, their religious significance becomes clear. He discovers that during the spring and fall equinoxes, the two special times of the year when day and night are in perfect balance, Sphinx, temple, and pyramid are all perfectly aligned with the rising and setting sun.
And you can kind of visualize it because during the equinox, the sun rises directly over this court. In the center axis of the temple, we have a niche for a statue. And then on the opposite wall of the temple, we have another niche, also on center axis. And these two statues would be illuminated during the equinox. So the sun would rise and light up the statues, giving birth to the statue as it's illuminated. Then as it makes its arc across the sky, the statue would be darkened to die, and then it would illuminate the other one, showing it reborn. So we have this eternal cycle of death and rebirth.
On these special days of the year, the sun passes over the temple and drops down behind the Sphinx itself to the base of Khafre's pyramid. Sun, pyramid, Sphinx, temple, all united. With the Sphinx, the symbol of the pharaoh himself, presenting offerings to the sun god.
This is a giant representation of Khafre offering this temple to the gods.
And why the lion's body? Because the lion is a symbol of both the pharaoh and the sun, bringing together in one place the two great powers that govern all life in Egypt.
The Egyptians were close observers of nature. So the lion is yellowish, like the sun. It has this huge mane, which is again like the sun and the sun rays. Lions are most active at the dawn, which is when they do their hunting, and they like to bask in the sun. So all of these things together really make the lion an ideal symbol for the sun and the sun god.
We can look at the Sphinx and call it a vanity project. A man carves his own image directly into a rock face. But in fact, the ambition behind it seems far bigger. The way all this was built, the positioning of each stone, the alignment of Sphinx with temple and pyramid, These make it a piece of precision engineering. And the way Lacavara reads it, it all has a special purpose: to give Khafre nothing less than immortality.
So the main purpose of all this construction, all this building, was to ensure the eternal life, the immortal existence of the pharaoh, of Khafre. So it has to do with the resurrection of the king, called this the resurrection machine. This kind of symbolism guarantees kind of everlasting life, that you would be part of this eternal cycle.
And although his world eventually vanished, Khafre's plan to live forever partly worked, as today, 4,500 years later, we still gaze in wonder upon the face of Khafre.